Hi, John and Mary. How are you guys? Oh, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Definitely, busy. 2021's off to a good start, but definitely busy. Yeah. You like my tie? We love our sushi out on the West Coast. I've been looking for some in Jersey. My first time here. I don't quite know the lay of the land. Now it's cold. It's January in New Jersey, so that's definitely I should have expected and packed a little warmer, but we're here. All right. Exactly, exactly. All right. Well, great. Before we kind of get into the specifics, I just wanted to kind of give a high level recap of our process here and kind of, get an understanding. And, you guys may know some of this we talked about in our prior meetings, but just recap kind of, our process and how this meeting may flow. So, you guys first came in a few weeks ago. We had the discovery meeting where you guys presented us with all the financial facts, all the statements, liability statements, investment statements, every different financial account you had, you provided information for. So thanks for your cooperation with that. That was definitely really, really helpful. And I feel like we got a pretty comprehensive view of on the input side. So that's great. The next meeting we had was the draft meeting. So I'm telling clients in the draft meeting, that's where we want to get from about 60% right to 90% right. And that's not to say we want to, stay at 90, because that's why we're having this meeting here today. But this is where we really take the raw input and review it with you guys to make sure the input looks right. And so we had that meeting a few weeks back, and that was definitely helpful. And so that brings us to today. So, what we want to do today, we want to review each of the relevant core topics. So, insurance, investment planning, tax planning, and estate planning. Really, you guys had goals, which we'll get to here in a second, and all of those fronts. So that's really the three-part process that we've gone by here today. Um, we're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to revisit this plan in the future. What I always tell clients, to say this to you guys again at the end. Um, this version is going to be some version of wrong in the future, right? And you shouldn't be discouraged by that. That's the game of life. Um, and so understanding that we need to revisit this on a regular schedule, or as things come up and your situation changes, that's okay. This is a roadmap now. The roadmap in the future is going to look a little different, but that's fine. That's why we're here, on an ongoing basis to provide um, that advice, that planning. So I think next I want to get into, again, this is kind of my last bit before we actually get into the plan itself. But um, I think one of the things to recognize, with the mutually defined goals that you guys had and the prioritized goals, they don't live in a vacuum. There's always going to be trade-offs, right? And a lot of times, a lot of times, if you really just want to get down to it, goals are just things that are going to cost money in the future. That's really the nature of it, right? So, there's going to be different um, things that we may not be able to do. We obviously want to fit them all in, but that's just from a framework perspective, I think that's something you guys should keep in mind, right? So just quick high level recap of your goals. So, we wanted to take a look at the estate picture and kind of reduce any exposures in that area. That was one. We wanted to do a comprehensive look at your insurance that's in place. We um, really thought that looking at that from top to bottom is going to be great, and that's going to kind of inform the decision on the long term care, which was a question, an area of concern that you guys had. Um, so next goal was reducing your personal income tax. Obviously, there's going to be a large tax liability for 2020 due to the sale of John's business. John, again, congratulations. really is cool to see someone start their business from and build it from the ground up, and being able to retire on your own terms is pretty amazing. So congrats on that. So income tax, we want to look at that, and then lastly, but not certainly not least, is we want to develop an investment plan for you guys. That's we'll have all these goals, but investments are really going to be the drivers of funding those goals, right? So just something to keep in mind there. And so, lastly, before I promise this is actually the last thing before we get into the insurance here in just a second. I just wanted to recap kind of the results we saw from that risk tolerance questionnaire that you guys filled out. So you're willing to assume a pretty high level of risk. You guys have been longtime market participants and investors. You've really reaped the benefits of staying invested, and while there are some recommendations we have for the portfolios, generally speaking, they've performed well, and you've seen that so having some risk and a good level of risk is, or a high level of risk in some cases, is actually a good thing. No, that doesn't mean we're going to buy GameStop, Mary. Sorry about that. No, we're long term. We're always long. We're always thinking long term, right? Um, so without further ado, I think I'll just kind of get into kind of um, our findings on each of the core areas. Does that sound good? And I actually misspoke. Before risk management, insurance, we're just going to get into a little bit of a kind of executive summary of the household. So your guys' balance sheet is incredibly strong. You have a net worth of about 13.5 million. 2020, in terms of income, is going to be a bit of an outlier just due to the down payment on the installment sale, but you're going to have a net cash flow this year of 1.6 million, which is a really great position to be in. And relatedly to the cash, and we'll get into kind of some of the recommendations with this. You have plenty of cash saved up for your emergency fund. They say to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses. You guys probably have somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 years, which it's great to have that liquidity buffer, but also we should be thinking about kind of how we need to reposition those assets to earn. We could reposition those assets to gain a higher rate of return. Um, and so one of the things that we immediately identified is that we recommend just paying off the remaining 19,000 and change on your vacation home balance, mortgage balance. Um, and by doing so, not only do you save the interest, you save the interest, which would equate to about $1,400 over the remaining 33 payments. So that's not insignificant money. Another way to think about it is you're essentially locking in a rate of return of 5% on that portion of your assets, right? Because by foregoing the interest, that 5% rate of return is sure a lot higher than what your cash is getting paid right now in a savings account. So we recommend paying that off. I know it's a bit of a preference thing, but that's kind of where we see that recommendation. So another use of cash, and this ties into the investment piece, but we really think that college funding is obviously a goal for you guys, and so we recommend funding 529 plans, opening 3 for Sarah, James, and Michael, and funding those. There's a few different methods to funding. A lot of people talk about super funding or forward funding, which essentially for a couple allows you to contribute $150,000 to an account without incurring a gift tax penalty. You are essentially funding 5 years worth of annual exclusions in 1 year, um, and so that gets a lot of press, and for some situations it makes a lot of sense. My recommendation to you both would be not to fund super fund. There's a few risks associated with doing so. Um, really, obviously your oldest grandchild is 15, so there's always the risk of investing that lump sum today and then bad market timing and the account goes down. So um, that's one. That's one risk. And another thing to think about, I mean, for your oldest grandchild with 3 years until they reach college age, you could always, keep in the back pocket just paying the tuition directly. Um, it's not as flashy, but it wouldn't be a gift tax. Obviously, you wouldn't incur a gift tax on those because it's a direct payment. Um, but your younger grandkids have a bit more of a runway, I guess is what I'm trying to say, for those assets to appreciate to be able to pay for qualified education expenses. Otherwise, the money would be subject to a 10% penalty. But another thing to think about also is that any funds contributed to one grandchild can be rolled into the funds that are for the other two grandchilds, depending on who needs it. So, say James or Michael gets a scholarship, you can roll that over to Sarah's account um, and without penalty. So just something to think about. They're pretty flexible in that nature. So that's kind of all I wanted to talk about, just high level cash current scenario. There is some ratio analysis that we provided, which kind of gets into the. I won't get into the weeds right now regarding each ratio analysis and kind of the benchmarks for it. But know you're in a really good position. The sale of the business definitely bolstered that position, but even without that, you're definitely in good shape. Mainly because you have such little on the debt side, which is always a great place to be. Okay, next I wanted to get into kind of insurance, and we wanted to look at every different policy you had and make sure it just made sense for you guys. So, starting with the homeowner's policy, we identified that your primary residence is pretty significantly underinsured. So, a lot of times you can receive a co-insurance penalty um, if your coverage amount for your homeowners isn't 80% of the fair market value of the home. And by the home, important distinction here is I mean the building. So that wouldn't be including any land fair market value. So just the building. Um, with a policy of 400,000 on your primary residence, you're currently only insuring about 64%, and you would need to add an additional $220,000 to get to that 80%. Um, so that's definitely number one priority for the insurance fund. The vacation on your vacation home, the coverage looked good. You're actually over 80%. I think about 83%. So that's not a significant over insurance amount. So I think you're pretty good from that perspective. Your auto policy looked good. I think that it it may make sense to increase your deductible and lower the premium. And auto policies are widely available, so I definitely think that's something that you guys could take advantage of. I would also ask whoever you end up going to for insurance. We have a relationship from the referral source, but you could really go to anybody. You should ask them about the property loss. It seems to be a little bit on the lower side, not super immediate cause for concern, but definitely just something to take a look at when you get advice from an agent. So, on umbrella coverage, it's a great problem to have. Well, let me back up. Generally speaking, they say you should insure, your liability coverage from on an umbrella policy should be roughly in line with your net worth. In your guys' case, with having a net worth of over 13 million, policies in that range, either one, they're really expensive, or two, they, there's just a lot of hoops to jump through. You may need to go to a specialty underwriter, which it's just not prudent. So again, before I got ahead of myself, it's a good problem to have. It really is. but we do, recommend adding a few $1 million, 3 to 4 in coverage. Um, so, you guys, one of your guys' main questions was on long-term care. So on long-term care, you're a little bit past the optimal window to buy long-term care policies, and that's from a cost perspective. Um, it's definitely smart that you guys asked. I mean, really, not a lot of things are certain these days, but one of the things that seems to be certain is that healthcare costs are rising, and they have for the past 20 years at a pace that greatly outclips inflation. So a lot of long-term care policies changed greatly because of that, but it gets a lot of attention, rightfully so. But you do have a great ability to self-insure with the asset base that you've built up here. Yeah. So what was that, Mary? Yes, that is a good point. Premiums for long-term care, they are deductible to the extent that they exceed 7.5% of your aggregate gross income, and that's in conjunction with other unreimbursed medical expenses. But there is a limit to how much can be deducted for long-term care premiums, depending on your age. For your age, it would be about $4,350. Yeah, I mean that is one of the attractive things about long-term care policies, but it's not enough for me to think that to think that that's a good recommendation for you guys to buy. But as I said, it's definitely a thing to be thinking about. So on the healthcare side, you guys are enrolled in Medicare. You're both in excellent health. So I really think that this is adequate coverage for you guys. You have the ability to self-insure just like you do for long-term care. If anything goes over and beyond that Medicare coverage. Life insurance. So John has about four. John has $4 million in cover in term life that will kind of be dropping off in 2023. At this time, I really don't think there's a need for adding or renewing any coverage. You guys have accumulated a sufficient asset base. This $4 million policy has really taken you from your peak earning years and protected you in the case of an unfortunate event happening with income replacement. But I don't see a need at this point to buy more life insurance of any sort. One insurance thing that one insurance point that it's not on your set of facts you gave us, but something you should think about. So your inverted Jenny and your boat, we didn't see any information that led us to believe that you had coverage for either of those. The insurance market for both of them is a little bit more obscure, but one thing that you should look into with the help of an agent is adding an endorsement to your homeowner's policy for for the home in which these objects reside. So something to think about there. So that's it from insurance. If you guys don't have any questions, I'll keep going here to invest in. Okay, great. Okay, so just high level, some of the strengths we identified with investing. You have $3.8 million in qualified accounts, and about 1.6 in taxable accounts. That's a great asset base. As I said, you guys have been long-time market participants, and that's really, you know, a lot of the growth or a lot of the balance there is represented by growth of just staying the course and staying invested. So that's great. The other high point, the mutual fund portfolio is really being managed well. It's had good performance. It's currently at about an 85% stock, 15% bond mark, which is a reasonable risk. It's a reasonable asset allocation for your risk tolerance. Um, I recommend, just given your risk tolerance, I think anywhere from the 70% stock to 80% stock to 20% bond, 30% bond is a reasonable place for you guys to be. Um, a lot of, and the reason being, um, you know, there's a lot of talk about the 60-40 portfolio or 50, if you're a little bit older and more conservative, maybe even less than that. Um, we're sort of in a different paradigm here where fixed income really just isn't paying what it once was. Rates are near historic lows. And so, really, what that means for a lot of people, and I'm having the same conversation with a lot of clients, stocks are the main growth drivers, and they need to be. That's where you're really going to get capital appreciation. Steady income's nice, but there's plenty of stocks that offer high paying dividends, and we can get into more details there. But that's just kind of from an overall asset allocation what I was thinking for you guys. Okay, so those are two high points. There's a few areas of growth we've also identified, right? So um, in your stock portfolio, stocks B, C, and D have performed really well. A, not so much. Um, which is never good to see is investment lose. It's never fun to see an investment lose value like that, but it is helpful from an income tax perspective. So, with that large embedded loss, we should sell. You should sell stock A for a $218,000 embedded loss, and what you do by that is tax loss harvesting. So you can apply that loss to any capital gains. In the case of the sale of your business, that's going to be it could be a great tax asset for you. And if you were to sell any of the stocks or realize gains on a long-term basis, and anything can be not used can be carried forward indefinitely. So that's great. And then the other thing just to note on the tax loss harvesting, um, you know, if company A you still believe strongly on the growth prospects, it is possible to, um, you know, without triggering what's called wash sale rules, to keep exposure to that company in that industry without directly holding it. So, as an example, let's say stock A was Exxon or any other oil stock. Really, it's been a rough year for oil. You know. Basically, you'd sell that stock and you could buy a suitable ETF, oil ETF. So if that stock's Exxon, you buy an oil ETF, your run of the mill oil ETF. You still keep exposure because you feel positive in the overall prospects for that company. And then after 31 days, to avoid the wash sale, you buy back that stock. So you harvest the loss, tax loss harvesting. So that's tax loss harvesting. We On your qualified side, I think it might be prudent to consider adding international and small cap exposure for John's 401k. Right now, he's just in an S&P fund, which is great. Excuse me. He's going to track the market, give market like returns. But diversification in this sense could also be an asset for him. So I think that's something to consider. Um, This is more on a not so much the actual investments itself, but on an account level. Um, I would recommend that you guys both open rollover IRAs. So you have your two 401k accounts, and you are no longer covered in the plan, which means if in retirement you had some sort of earned income, you wouldn't be able to contribute to the 401ks. In the case of a rollover IRA, you do have the ability to contribute more, qualified dollars towards retirement. I know that's not an utmost concern for you, but the other thing to note with IRA is they offer a little more flexibility than 401ks, and potentially you might save on fees. 401ks tend to have higher fees, so something to think about there. And the other thing on the 401ks, and this is kind of ties more into estate planning, but you should both list each other as the primary beneficiaries. As stands, the account is payable to your estate. So, and we'll talk more about this in the estate planning, but the beneficiaries, you should both list each other as beneficiaries, and then the contingent beneficiaries should be 50-50 with your sons. That should also be per stirpes. So I believe it's Stevens two sons. If Stephen were to predecease them, um, they would both receive 25% per stir piece. Um, and then lastly, on the investment front, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation, but we need to, and we're gonna work, put our heads together to think of a plan, and being able to invest the proceeds of those quarterly installment payments. And I think that is, definitely one of the concerns you guys brought to us, and your head's in the right place there. Great question, John. Great question, John. So we'll get an actual plan together. But what I recommend, those quarterly installment payments are about $150,000 each. I recommend, generally speaking, using a dollar cost averaging system, which essentially means you're buying equal shares of stock to reduce short-term price volatility. So you could take that $150,000, depending on your asset allocation, and buy set dollar amounts of stock. So if a stock price is up, you're buying less of it. If a stock price is down, you're buying more of it. So it's just a way to, in the short run, reduce volatility and eliminate some of that bad timing risk. Next topic we're going to talk about is tax. So you guys are currently in the highest rate with a combined federal and state rate of about 44%. So this next uh, point I have for you is probably not going to be relevant, until that potentially that rate drops down. But you asked about turning pre-tax 401k dollars into post-tax tax-free rather assets. And so the way to do that would be through Roth conversions. So you're uneligible to contribute to a Roth IRA as your income currently eliminates your eligibility, but there is no limit on making conversions in terms of income. Those conversions would be taken from your 401k, pre-tax dollars. You open up a Roth IRA, you convert the dollars, pay ordinary income on them, and then essentially those assets grow tax-free. So that's a great thing to think about. Another benefit of Roths, there's no RMDs associated, so they're a great estate planning tool as well. Again, this isn't something we're recommending for 2020 due to the high liability associated with the sale of the business, or potentially likely the next 10 years this won't even be on our radar, or won't be something we're doing, but it should be something on your radar, if that makes sense. So another thing, you guys haven't directly expressed a charitable inclination, but QCDs are a tax effective way to do this. And essentially, QCDs, when you turn 70 and a half, you're eligible to make them. At the age 72, you're going to have to start taking required minimum distributions from your 401k 2B rollover IRA accounts. And essentially, QCDs are a way to, if you have charitable intent or an organization that's close to you, you can pay that charity directly from your qualified account and satisfy your required minimum distribution. So, in essence, avoid the ordinary income tax that would have been due on that distribution otherwise. So two big ticket items that we wanted to talk about that you guys brought to us concerns with is the installment sale, how it's taxed, and the inverted Jenny, right? So installment sales, there's three components to every installment sale, every installment payment rather. There's a return of basis, there's the capital gains aspect, and then there's the interest, which is taxable as ordinary income. So just like a mortgage, as the payments keep going, they become more weighted towards principal and less weighted towards interest. But something to think about. So, this year you had a 1.2 million, you received a $1.2 million down payment, and then roughly $150,000 per quarterly payment, a little bit less. So that cash inflow is basically comprised of those three different things. If you take a look at the financial plan, we have a You know, we're not tax professionals, but we have a calculation that'll give you kind of a rough estimate for those liabilities and how you know they're categorized. So the inverted Jenny, you're looking to sell this. I mean, you believe in it. It's a great investment, and it seems to be to me as well. Um, you know, one thing to keep in mind, you know, I don't know. I'm not an expert in the coin business. Shockingly, don't have that one under my belt yet. But 15% was one of the things that you presented in terms of a commission fee. So I would shop around a little bit just to see if you can, you know, find a vendor who might be able to take a little bit less off the top. I was getting there next, John. So yes, the way that alternative investments are taxed for long-term gains, long-term capital gains purposes, they're at 28%. So essentially, you know, it's less than your marginal bracket, which is good, but it's a little bit higher than it would be for a marketable security, which would be 20% given your income. So that's a little bit of a bummer, that extra 8%. But again, these are all subject to change with different legislation. So something to keep on your radar for sure. Um, and then the other thing we talked about from a tax perspective was also just harvesting that loss in stock A. So we talked about the benefits of that already. Okay, getting to the last topic here. You know, this topic, well, there's a lot of hoopla for, not hoopla, but lots of strategies, right? And that's estate planning. So we're not estate planning professionals, but we did provide you with a detailed listing of your properties. Good question, Mary. I was getting there as well. So, um, H means husband, W means wife, JT means joint tenants, and then ILIT means irrevocable life insurance trust. So those are kind of the owners, and those show the designated owners. Yeah. Um, and so um, the ILIT, I'll start there just because we just mentioned it. So, John, you transferred your policy in 2018, which smartly you did because after the 3-year look back period expires, it'll be removed from your estate. So that's great. Um, again, you know, anything that's titles and joint tenants would avoid the process of probate, which an expensive process. It's basically a court-ordered, government-mandated process that for sole ownership items that don't have clear beneficiaries, they basically take inventory. There are some benefits to it, which I won't get into today, but most people want to avoid it, and rightfully so. Um, so if you have assets that are titled properly with clearly designated beneficiaries, you tend to avoid this process. So in order to do that for your situation, you guys are going to need to retitle your CDs, the installment receivable, the stamp, the vacation home, the autos, and the mutual fund portfolio, and then the boat as well. So a long list there, but this is all something to be done at, you know, in one trip as a estate planning attorney. So that's great. Um, and then when you go see that estate planning attorney, they're also going to have some recommendations in terms of trusts to fund or unfunded trusts. And some of the more popular ones are marital trust, bypass trust. I mean, you could go on and on. There's lots of trusts, but they'll have a better recommendation for you. You know, when you go in and get those retitled. We'd also recommend adding durable powers of attorney and healthcare proxies for each other. So if either one of you become incapacitated, you could make decisions on their behalf in their best interest, right? Um, Another thing, I'll just, you know, just a disclaimer, and I'm not throwing estate attorneys under the bus, but they tend to be, you know, let's put it, their fees aren't inconsequential. Meaning, you know, to get all that work done, it's gonna run you a little bit of money, but you have plenty of cash in your checking account to pay for a $10,000 to $15,000 fee to go in and get those. And in the long run, it might be a lot less than probate and other legal fees would be for you as well. So I'm going to take a pause there before we get into the plan of action here. The plan of action, I'm just going to slow, you know, just quickly recap kind of the most pertinent actions that we identified. So, any questions right there? Okay, great. So we just talked about it, but estate planning attorney. I think you guys should, if you need a recommendation, I'm happy to provide one, and I can get you one next week. I can get you one today. I can get you one when you need to, um, or when you're able to, rather. But that's something I'm happy to do for you guys. Is put a few calls in, and guys can go get those assets retitled, get any trust set up, and make sure that everything's in order there. The second thing we talked about, so insurance, there's instead of different policies, you're going to want to increase that coverage, namely your primary residence homeowners and excuse me, your umbrella coverage. You also ask the agent about adding an endorsement for the Jenny stamp and um, your boat. Two important things there. So, and again, I have an agent, not an agent. Yes, an agent. I have an agent who we have just to disclose, we have a compensation arrangement, but I can really swear by his process. I've referred clients there in the past. So um, that's two. Three, 529. So it may make sense, as we talked about, sit down with your sons, kind of really get an idea of who's splitting the tuition bills essentially, right? That'll give us a more informed idea about, you know, how to fund. But high level, I really, I at the current moment would not recommend the super funding option that we talked about. But getting these plans set up is definitely something noteworthy. And the other thing to think about, as grandparents, those assets actually won't be counted against. I should have mentioned this in the first section. They won't be counted against your grandkids' financial eligibility. So that's great. And then lastly, so a few things on this investment piece. We want to kind of establish a strategy for the installment payments and to reduce some of that cash to position it to earn more on the long term. Um, you know, we do offer investment services in house here. So with myself and one of the professionals from that team, we're going to come up with an investment proposal for you. If you get that proposal and you don't like it, there's no obligation to stay with us. This is our financial planning engagement. That's a whole different thing, right? So it's a different process, different set of circumstances, but we are going to make that offer to you. And then, more broadly, we try to think about diversifying. And in the financial planning, you'll be able to read a little bit more about potential options for doing that, and just rounding out the portfolio. That makes sense. So that's that's it. That's all I have. Any questions from you guys? Yep. I'll follow up with an email regarding with all the referrals, estate planning professional, contact information for him, and then the insurance agent as well. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, like I said, it's been really great getting to know you guys, and I like learning. I like learning from the process just as much as you guys are learning from me. Hopefully, every process, every client's situation presents something new, and so that's definitely been a joy for me to be able to help you guys, and hopefully, we'll be able to kick off some of the actionable items with this here in the near future. Okay, fantastic, you guys. All right, enjoy your weekend. Bye bye.